that? R.I.P. Tom Benson. Shout out to the whole Who That Nation. Now who that? That fever, that flavor, that funk. I say who that? That fever, that flavor, that funk. Oh, who that? That fever, that flavor, that funk. I say who that? That fever, that flavor, that funk. You got that fever? Yeah, yeah, that fever for the flavor. Got that flavor? Yeah, yeah, that flavor for the funk. You got that fever? Yeah, yeah, that fever for the flavor. Got that flavor? Yeah, yeah, that flavor for the funk. I got that fever, my people. See, we not equal, my people. I'm like that dog saint underneath the steeple, my people. Got Drew Brees, he the feature, and our defense the sequel. The D-line and linebackers, man, they coming to reach ya. Make enemies some believers, cause we overachievers. DBC 50-50 balls and we call them keepers. Y'all can follow this leader, cause Sean Payton will teach ya.
NewOrleans.Football podcast coming to you live from the Better Call Votto podcast studio. We're doing a little bonus episode here, doing it in person. Kevin's in town, so bringing it to you guys live from the studio. Kevin, what's good with you, man?
Man, I'm in the city. You know, we decided to do a little something live. And, yeah, the draft is close, and it couldn't be a better time. So I'm here to record, and let's get busy, man. Yeah,
we just had a great time with the elite members at today's event. So shout out to you guys. Thanks for coming through.
Yeah.
And as always, represented by Daniel Sant CPA. So if you are a business owner needing some guidance with your daily accounting, Daniel Sant CPA can help get your finances in order. They provide relevant accounting information, detailed analysis, and clear communication in a timely manner. Call today, 318-321-2765, or visit santcpa.com. That is down in the show notes. And if you need legal help with any of the following: car wrecks, offshore injuries, 18-wheeler collisions, Maritime Jones Act, hurricane or storm claims, you better call Votto at 504-323-4777 or 985-677-1085 for your free consultation and case review, VottoLaw.com. And then also check out our guys, Firehouse Subs, Veteran Boulevard location, great people, do great things for the community. So go get a sub from them. What do we got today? We got a good show, some draft talk.
Draft talk.
It's finally coming up. It's been the longest, slowest build up of all time. I'm starting to get a little bit of draft fatigue, I think, just because of over analysis, but I'm ready to see what they're going to do. So it'll be exciting once we finally have some real players to talk about.
Yeah, I know. It's like been hypothetical for months, and it feels like the draft season just gets like longer and longer each year. And like at this point, you start to look like you have players and you like what you see in these players. And then after you see them for like the second or third time, you're looking at these guys and you're like, man, let me try to find what's wrong with them. And yeah, I feel like you get to a point where like we overanalyze them to a point. Like, what do you do well? And that's how we start looking at these players. And after like, you know, like I said, second or third time, you're like just finding like stuff that makes you maybe not like the player as much as you probably originally did. So that's like kind of like my head signal for saying it's time to get to the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at it philosophically, if we're building it out, you got to make 3 picks. Are you making all 3 picks? Are you moving up? What do you want them to do? Do you want them to be 3 guys in? Do you want them to go up and get higher value? How do you want them to go about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. This feels like one of those years where I feel like they should kind of let the draft come to them in a lot of ways, because like when you look at this draft, right, there's some players at the top. You see maybe the kid from Michigan, maybe the edge/inside rusher from Georgia, the cornerback from Cincinnati, maybe the offensive tackle from Bama. You know, some of those guys you consider in a tier above some of the rest of the players. And then you get to the part of the draft where a lot of guys are, they're kind of probably graded similarly, right? You look at, maybe some of the wide receivers, right? You say, okay, well, how do I feel about – and you can put Jameis and Williams in that top tier, but, for cases, you can compare him with Olave and say maybe those guys are similarly graded, right? So if you get one or both of those guys, if you get one of those guys, I think you're happy if you don't get the other one, right? Maybe, with some of the things, with some of the tackles, if you get the Raymond kid or Penning, maybe those guys are grouped similarly, maybe even some of the safety. So I feel like this is one of those drafts where you can kind of let the picks come to you in some way and try to leave with more, right? Because there's some positions on this team that we'll talk about that maybe should be addressed here. And, the more you start trading away your picks, the less you have an opportunity to do that. Then you kind of got to start looking at free agency to take care of some of these must-sign positions that you feel like you gotta get.
The thing that terrifies me is if they get into the draft and the quarterbacks don't get drafted early and they are lower and both of them fall.
Yeah.
I start to worry that they can't get the wide receiver. So that's going to kind of be the pressure point for me is what happens with those guys. And I think if you start getting to a point where you think they aren't going to get picked and you're down to one of those top 4 wide receivers, to me, that's the point when you start looking up. I don't like the idea, and we've talked about it a few times about going up to get the tackle. I mean, it's okay if they do it, and I'd support the decision.
Yeah.
But I don't like that value necessarily. I like them to get 2 different players with those picks. But if they get to a spot where they got to give up the 2nd round pick or the 3rd round pick to get up to ensure that you get one of the top 4 wide receivers, I feel like that's the way you kind of got to play it. And I feel like it's fully dependent on getting at least one of those quarterbacks. They really need to hope for both of them to go in the top 15 so that you have one of those wide receivers for sure fall to you at that spot.
Yeah, that's a good point you make. That's a good point you make. Which brings me to a question. Like if one of those one of those quarterbacks on the board, like ideally, if you're the Saints and you don't want to look at a quarterback this draft, right? And you want those guys to go as quickly as you can before, right? If you want like all the positions that you're not interested in, like, off-ball linebacker, for instance, if you're not looking at a quarterback, then that position, maybe even cornerback, right? Some of these positions that you feel like you're set in, you kind of want those guys to go before because, like you said, it pushes the need positions for you down, right?
Yeah.
But just starting with the quarterback position, like if the Saints are on the board and both of those guys are sitting there, like, do you feel like that's a position that do you think they should consider it? Like, and I know we've spoken about this. It's like a topic that we keep rehashing, but like, just like finally, right? Like, if you got a choice between Malik and Pickett, and then, you can still run with the guy you have in the house, like, what would you do in that position if you're the Saints?
My best case for that, I still prefer them to get players that can help this year. And it's just simply because I don't think I'm fully sold on any of these quarterbacks at this point. I feel like Malik Willis can be a really great quarterback, and I see a scenario where he might not end up being a very good quarterback. I could see a scenario with Kenny Pickett where you get him in the building and then in 3 years you feel like you need another quarterback, and you might end up in that same position now, like with Jameis. So if you aren't significantly upgrading that position and you have a chance to get the wide receiver, to get the offensive tackle, and get the safety in the first 3 picks, I feel like that's the best allocation of assets.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think, the signing of Jameis and he looks like his rehab is going well. It looks like it's going on time. It looked like he's going to be available. And so I think for this year, with the quarterbacks that are available this year, I think for the Saints, the best thing would be for them is to just kind of augment their team outside of the quarterback position, right? I think, we saw enough from Jameis last year with, to his benefit, like, he played well at times and he didn't have the best supporting cast around him. And so I think if you, give him more weapons, he has another year in the system. He knows that he's going to get the reps in training camp for his existence. He's going into the season knowing that this is my team, right? And just all of that. And, Jameis has a way of just making you feeling optimistic, right? He's a very optimistic guy. He talks positively, and sometimes it rubs off on you, right? And I think just listening to him talk, how excited he is, and hearing him reflect about some of the things that he talked about with the team, right? When he spoke earlier, he said, "Hey, I know how they really feel about me. I know the areas that I need to address, and I feel like listening to this experience where he came back to them gave him an opportunity to kind of get some of that feedback from them." So I'm with you. I think they should look at addressing some of these, more need positions where quarterback is not one. And so with that said, right, do you feel like with the picks they have this year that they're under a little bit more pressure to have success because, they traded their first round pick next year to have another pick in this draft and some more picks. And we don't need to rehash that, but like with that kind of hanging over their head, like you don't want that pick to be a top 10 pick. So do you feel like the way that they draft, is that going to affect the way that they draft this year because they feel like they may need to have some of that early success? So they're not giving their 2023 pick isn't a really high pick for another team, Philly.
Maybe a little bit. I mean, I see the thought process. I'm not sure necessarily that I feel like the season makes or breaks on either one of these picks. If one of them's a pick for the future, I don't know that it necessarily changes the overall outlook because I think there's still moves off the board that you can do after the draft. You can go out and still sign Honey Badger. You can sign Jarvis Landry, and you can address some of these other needs. So I just feel like they need to do the things that are best for their team. And if Kenny Pickett is graded higher than everybody else, or Malik Willis is there and he's graded higher than everybody else, go out and do all those things. It's just I haven't necessarily gotten the vibe that, and again, this is when people start lying. Like everybody's lying right now. But I haven't necessarily gathered the vibe that they're in love with any of these quarterbacks. And I think if you take one you need to be in love with them because
Absolutely.
In the first round, even if it is 16 or it's 19, like you need to look at it and say, okay, this guy's going to be a potential
Future
10-year starter.
Right.
And if you don't feel that way about him, you can't make that pick. It isn't a point where it is a lottery ticket. I think second round, Sam Howell, the kid from Mississippi, like one of those guys later on, that's when you take a chance and maybe scratch that lottery ticket and see what happens. Day one, I'm not doing it. So
yeah.
But if they love them, you stash them, you find a way to augment your roster other ways, and off you go. But I just don't see it as if it's playoffs or bust through the draft.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't think that they should build their team. I don't think that they should operate in that mode. Like, hey, we have to do so much to have success this year that pick is not going to be a premium pick for Philly, right? I think that is the wrong take. But I in the same breath, I think it is. Like when you make a move like this and that you're giving up that pick next year, you're giving up that pick with the thought that like my team is good. This move is going to bolster my team, and that I'm giving Philly the 32nd pick ideally, right, in this draft for the next draft for the pick that they got from this year, right? So I think it's a little bit in their mind where they don't want that to be a high pick, but I don't think they're necessarily operating in that mode.
I know you're like making an extreme example there.
Yeah.
But if your season's riding on top 10 or not top 10 based on pick 16 or 19, there's probably significant problems, and you're going to be in the top 10 if you're thinking that way already. Yeah. So I think they're going to be going into it. I look at them as a 9-10 win team, and I think coming out of the draft, they're probably in that 9-10-11 win range. Like I'm not sure that anything they can do theoretically that I'm thinking about right now significantly sways any of that stuff. I think if you draft well, you get some contributors, you have decent health, this team's going to be in that range. They're going to be in the playoffs, and then you see what happens from there. But I don't think that, if they're going to be a top 10 team, it's top 10 regardless, I think, really, of what happens in this draft. And it's because Alvin got suspended for a ton of games. You didn't find a way to overcome it. And, guys get injured, and Jameis doesn't have the season you want. Like, all those things are going to be independent of what happens in the draft.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this feels like one of those drafts where, like, if you want to see these teams take these quarterbacks early, right? You want to push the Chris Olaves, the Pennings, or maybe even another tackle down, right? You want the guys that you have on your board, these premium positions that you feel like you may need to address. Maybe it's safety, right? Maybe Kyle Hamilton falls, or they love the kid from Michigan, right? So yeah, it definitely feels like, personally, right, I think it's one of those drafts where you hope some positions get pushed up, and quarterback being one of them, like I said. And so with that being said, we both kind of landed on the fact that, like, hey, quarterback, this is maybe not the draft to be looking at the future of your franchise at the quarterback position. So what are some of the positions? Well, let's talk about some of the positions that you feel like they have to address in this draft, right? And we can talk about it in the first and the second round context. I think it's probably good. Once you get into the third, it gets a little bit tricky to pick for needs. So let's start with the offensive tackle position. Do you think that they have to come out of this draft with a tackle, or do you think, like, hey, Hurst is a guy who's, he has time, right? Armstead was hurt at times when he was here. They're used to playing with someone else at left tackle who's maybe not, a top 3 left tackle in that position. I mean, a person at that position. So do you think, like, they have to come away with the future of left tackle in this draft, or is it a position where they say, hey, we can run with what we got in the house, or maybe try to find a free agent subsequently after the draft?
I don't think it's a must position. I think it's need, high level need. They can go through the draft, not get one, come out of it, run it with Hurst. Yeah. And I think you're okay. That's a survivable situation. We've seen them survive it before. Mm. It's not a thriving situation, though. And I think if you do get that tackle, your offense is a lot better. I think that Jameis is probably better supported. And all we talk about Jameis is, he's got to get weapons. He's got to get weapons. He also needs to be protected. Yeah. Right. And if he has a lot of pressure on him, then he's going to make mistakes. I think James Hurst is fine. He's probably a replacement level tackle, but I think that if you have an opportunity to make that a strength of your team, to bring your offensive line back to that point where it's a high-end offensive line, and I think they've kind of gotten away from that, really. Yes. Even last year, I wouldn't, Pete's out, Cesar Ruiz is struggling. Armstead's hurt. I think that it was a weakness of the team last year. Hurt. Yeah. And I think the running game looked like a team that wasn't as well blocked as it has been in the past. So I think for them to be at their best, they need to be a running team. They need to be a play action team. If you can strengthen left tackle, you can do both those things at a much higher level. Yeah. But it's okay if you don't. I think there's a way around it. But ideally, I would put it at the top of the I think said it on the last pod, like a high level want, just right below that cusp of must. But I do not think it's necessarily a must position. The way I look at wide receiver as if you don't get a wide receiver, like just I might shut down the website. Like if they don't draft a wide receiver, like New Orleans football may no longer exist just because like it's just what are you doing at that point?
We don't want to cover another offensive season like the one we just had.
And I'm joking, but I mean,
absolutely. And you wrote about NewOrleans.Football about just how much they ran play action and some of the results that they had like when they did that. And so I'm glad you brought it up just to tie it in because we look at this offense and we see that while they need weapons, they need wide receivers, they need pass catchers. Absolutely, right. I think we both would say this team has one must position, and it is probably wide receiver. It needs safety, need offensive tackle, running back, maybe some of the other positions, right? But these are that's a must-have position, right? But I think if you have an offensive tackle who can block in the run game also as far as pass protect and like say from someone like Penning, that's the guy who run blocking was a strength of his, obviously. Like that can help your offense in ways too. The run game helps the pass game, right? So if you give Jameis a healthy Kamara, Pete returns, Ramczyk is healthy, McCoy is a good player, Ruiz, we'll see what happens with that situation. Then I feel like that gives you more on offense without directly having to address that wide receiver position, even though it's a must position.
It's hard to even talk about like needs, must, wants, all that stuff because the level of need at wide receiver is so dire. It's like dangerously low blood sugar and talking about anything else, like it feels like not doing that position justice because the level of need at tackle isn't going to match wide receiver. So it's hard to even have like there's like a tier one and then like everything else below it. But yeah, man, I feel like if they can get one of these guys in here, it changes things a little bit. Yeah. You can be maybe kind of bad at one spot, but I don't think you can be bad at two spots. And even if they don't get another guy, like I feel like you got to get someone else in there developmentally at least to try to bring it up behind. Yeah. Landon Young, I thought was okay looking at him last year. I don't know necessarily how to project his future. I think there's still like a lot of development that needs to happen there. Getting Doug Marrone in might help him.
That's a big hire that we don't talk about enough.
It is, yeah. When you can get a former head coach as a position coach, like you did something really well on your coaching staff. So we'll see how he impacts Cesar Ruiz too. He might make James Hurst better. I mean, I think he makes potentially all these guys. Zach Strief's in his second year as a coach. I think that's going to help raise the level a little bit. So there's ways around it, but I think in the ideal world, you get the tackle, you get the wide receiver, and you get out of the first round, and you're kind of set up on that side of the ball, ready to go. And all the things you haven't done throughout the offseason now kind of are addressed a little bit.
And Dan Rochard's still in the building too.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's coaching a different position, but that's still a resource that they have. Yeah. So I definitely think that, the tackle is one of those positions that you can fill multiple needs, kind of like with filling that one position. Like I said, you help the run game, you help the pass game, you help the quarterback. There's a few different ways. And this is a deep tackle draft in the first couple of rounds too. So even if they don't get a guy in the first round, the deeper you get in the draft, the later you pick a tackle, the more weaknesses they have, right? Or more like, Teron was a third round pick. Most third round tackles don't turn out to be Teron Armstead, but you do feel like this is a draft where second round is a starter. Right, when you pick someone in the second round,
you think so for offensive tackle?
I think there are some guys in some later rounds. I've done less work on offensive tackles than I've done on some at the wide receiver position. But I did a little reading and I looked at some guys, and I think this is a draft where you can get a guy. Now, if you wait until the second, that may be a position where you have to move up, though, right? Like I don't know about picking like so far deep into the second. They're kind of in the middle. But I do think that if you get to the next tier guys in the draft, there are some tackles who you can have. They have some upside that you may want to look at. So, question about the wide receiver, and I mean we both know wide receiver is a ridiculously high need for this team, and we've been saying that pretty much the whole time, right? And we're going to continue to say it. But do you think it's a perception? Do you think like Mike being out makes it seem worse than what it make it seem worse? Not worse than what it really is, but just him not playing and seeing him not on the field with those guys. Like if Mike Thomas is on the field and he has a 16, 17-yard season, are we still talking about wide receiver the same way we would as it is with him not playing?
I mean, I think it's definitely more severe, more dire, because you can't look at him and know exactly, okay, Mike Thomas is 1,800 yards. I just saw it 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
And, they got their solidified number one and off they go. Like, there's a little bit of discomfort there that I think adds to some of the urgency of the need of that position. But I don't think that it would really, it changes how we talk about it, but I don't think the need necessarily changes entirely. Like, the need for a number 2 wide receiver, I think, is quite drastic.
Yes.
And I think the thing they figured out last year, and we've talked about this, 100 times, is just they overvalued the scheme. They now know that the scheme was part of it, but Drew Brees was a big, huge part of it too. And you take him out, and you can't just throw in 6th-round picks, 7th-round picks, undrafted guys, and expect everybody to elevate and off they go. And look, Sean had the comment at the golf tournament the other day about how they didn't need one in the first round. And that, like, I don't necessarily think that's wrong. Like, yeah, Mike Thomas did come out of the 2nd round.
That's true.
But when we say they have to draft a wide receiver in the first, or when Mike Triplett writes they have to draft a wide receiver in the first, it's just illustrative of how much work they need to do at that position. Like, I don't think Mike's saying, like, very rigidly, like, oh no, you cannot get a good player in the 2nd round. No, of course you can get good players in the 2nd round. And if that's how it plays out, okay, that's how it plays out. You get Mechie or whatever 2nd round, he could end up being a really good player.
We like him.
Yeah, Sky Moore could be a 2nd round guy. That could be pretty good. I mean, there's a handful of guys, but I think that, going into it, hey, they got to take someone in the first. That's just really, okay, this position has been neglected for a lot of years.
Too long,
the last guy you drafted, Traquan Smith, 3rd round, probably didn't, quite hit necessarily. I think he's a good player. I still think there's on-top potential. If he has a 16, 17-game season, I think we'll see things out of him. But I think ideally he's your 3rd wide receiver. You got Deontay Harris and that Hardy in that mix is the 3rd guy. But you need, like, that number 2 that has the upside of developing into being a Mike Thomas level player. And that's setting the bar super high. But you need those guys in the pipeline, and they don't have them. So when Mike writes that, it's not like this, like, oh, this is the only way it can be solved. But that's the ideal, best way for it to be solved. And we got to have the conversation through that lens to give the justice of Kenny Stills was a starter last year. Kevin White was a starter last year. You need to draft a wide receiver in the first round. Like, there's no other conclusion here. And if they don't get one day one, I mean, people probably should feel a little uncomfortable. They'll definitely address it probably day 2 if they don't do it day 1. But I mean, I think it's at the point now where the feelings of discomfort are extremely valid and legitimate.
They're valid. Yeah, they're valid. And also, if you don't take a wide receiver in the first, I mean, I'm of the opinion that if they took an offensive tackle and a wide receiver in the 1st round, if they double down on wide receiver in the 2nd round, I understand it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because I believe in, like, sometimes, if you have a severe weakness, and I think that wide receiver can be considered that, then it's okay to, like, invest some additional resources. So now that could be a wide receiver, a free agent signing after the draft on top of drafting somebody. It could be drafting 2 guys, right? But I think the thing that has to fit into both trains of thoughts is there has to be a wide receiver drafted in this draft, right? And I think it needs to be done in the 1st round because, again, when you get into these later rounds and you get into guys who, that you're drafting in the 2nd or you're drafting in, different parts of the draft. Yes, again, 2nd round that's a starter pick, right? When you draft in the 2nd round, we're not drafting Stanley John Baptiste, right? We're not going developmental cornerback here. We're trying to, you're trying to pick a guy that's going to come in and play. And so, I don't want to take a hard line here because I don't think that's how teams think. And, we try to, factor in all that stuff when we make our decisions. But I kind of think it has to be a 1st round wide receiver. Now, if it isn't, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It doesn't mean that they're incompetent. I just think that I would probably disagree with it. And I just think you leave yourself open. You give yourself a smaller margin of error when you take these guys in these later rounds, because, again, you're getting into situations where a guy has more weaknesses. Like when you look at, Chris Olave, for instance, he's someone that you and I spoke about, and we're both pretty high on him for the Saints. Like, you're getting a guy out the box. Like, when you open the present, sometimes in Christmas when you have these presents, you got to put them together and you got to, like, screw stuff together and make sure it works. Olave, you're getting an elite run out the box. You just open it and it works, right? And when you get into the 1st round, that's kind of the example that I think about, right? It's like these guys, they're good at certain things and you can use that day 1, and they're good at more than what you're going to get from guys in later rounds. So I think they should really be aggressive and take and just say, hey, we need to take a guy in the first round at this wide receiver position, and then you can leave the draft open to like BPA or other positions you may need after that. But I just think when the situation is so dire at a position where you don't even have a guy that can be a good number 2, I think you got to just be really aggressive when you attack that position.
I'll put it like this, and I think it's kind of an easier way to sum it up. Like if they wait until the second and they get a guy and he works, that's cool. Like I don't think it necessarily. Like I agree with Sean that it doesn't absolutely have to be a first. It's solvable other ways. The thing is if you wait till the second with this situation and you get it wrong, it's really it's a less forgivable situation. If you draft one of the top 4 guys and they don't hit, it's kind of like, I understand your process. You went after it hard. You got another pick so you could do this and another position. And this guy just didn't work. And I can understand that miss. But if you wait until 49 after going through last season, after getting this other first round pick,
not signing anybody in free agency yet.
Right. Yeah. And you kind of put it all on pick 49. I'm looking at it like, why did this happen like this? How did this process play out like this? Again, you have not done everything you needed to do to address this position. But again, you can wait till 49 and it might work, and these conversations might never happen. But it feels like a situation where it needs to be priority one. And if one of the top 4 are there, you have to do it. Now, if they get into a situation where those guys are gone, I don't want to see them reach for a player just so they said, okay, there's a first round pick, wide receiver, and tried to do it. Like if the value ain't there, the grade ain't there, don't force the pick. But if one of these top 4 guys are there and you bypass and wait till 49, it's a hard situation.
So when you say top 4 guys, like what are the guys that you're talking about specifically in those positions? Jameson Williams, Olave, Garrett Wilson, and then
London.
Yeah.
Okay, any one of those 4, I think you're good. Like I'm not even picky. Like just get one of those 4. I don't think you can really go wrong with any of the 4. I think they're all going to be very good players. But again, like if they're gone, the quarterbacks don't get drafted, the draft plays out kind of crazy. I'm not asking them to force a first round pick. That's when you make a mistake. But
that's fair.
But I mean.
I'll probably switch out Burks for London, but London is a guy that's like people opinions are all over with him. But I understand like
people are talking about him being like top 10 now.
right? And I understand people that I really respect like him as a prospect, and I understand what the allure is there.
Saints have done work on him. They had dinner with him and everything.
Yeah, as they should, right? Because he's a guy that
he's got to be in the mix.
He's got to be in the mix, right?
Burks, I mean, they've had dinner with all these guys. Yeah.
So, how do you think? Should the fact that there's a guy who they had in for a visit, who went to LSU, who played for Cleveland, who may potentially be a Saint, do you think that they should factor in the fact that maybe we sign him after the draft as part of their draft strategy, or should they kind of address those independently? I mean, I know teams don't really operate in these type of bubbles, but just in this situation, I think it's maybe a case where should that factor into our draft strategy at wide receiver, or should they totally be segregated from each other?
Has he signed?
Nope.
Then no.
There you go.
Yeah, no, you can't until he's on the team. I don't think that you can factor him into anything. He can be part of your plans after the draft. You might have a verbal arrangement with somebody, and then all of a sudden Cleveland comes in and they don't get their wide receiver in the draft, and all of a sudden their price tag goes up. So no, until he's signed and he's in the building, I don't think he can be part of your draft strategy at all. I don't think any player ever. They kind of had an agreement with Jameis, I think, the 1 year before going in, and that's still even something. That's as a backup, but you can't count on any of those things until that player is actually in the building. And no, you can't do it. But look, I think if they draft someone, I think he should still be on the table. I think if you can get him in as your 2-3, the rookie 2-3, whatever. Traquan's in another spot. Look, they rotate in 4 receivers all the time. So that spot on the depth chart doesn't even necessarily mean anything. Yeah, all those guys are gonna play. Deontay Hardy's gonna find a way to play in that situation. So they need to take that weakness and just keep building on it until it's a strength, and then build on it again until it's a strength again. I mean, we've said the whole time, like the best outcome is a rookie and a vet. You can get by with just the rookie. You can get by maybe with just the vet. I don't like the approach of just the vet, because a year from now, again, you're in this situation. You don't have a first round pick. You have older wide receivers. They need a young player in the pipeline just to circumvent having to pay 2 people $20, $25, $30 million, because that's what it takes. And I don't think you can build a good team if you're that top heavy at one position, that much invested in one position. So that's a spot where I think going forward strategically, it's got to be young talent, price out, get more young talent, price out, and just kind of cycle them through like that.
Yeah, and that's something we spoke about, and you specifically brought it up on one of the recent pods where you look at these wide receiver salaries and they're blooming, right? And if the NFL is saying, hey, look, we value the wide receiver position, right? It's telling you about how much these guys are getting paid. I mean, it's quarterback, and then you can say edge rusher and wide receiver pretty much like vying for what's going to be, the most second highest paid position. So, yeah, I'm with you. I don't think that they can even begin to think about a guy that's unsigned. And even if he was signed, I think that, if you sign Jarvis Landry, for instance, I mean, you got a 2-3 year window maybe that you're thinking about him, right? And that's just not a really good way to approach team building, right? In the draft, the purpose of the draft is team building, long-term team building, right? And free agency, the same for free agency, but sometimes you can plug these holes a little bit. Hey, we signed a guy to a 1 or 2 year deal, et cetera. So, yeah, I definitely think that they should look at those things separately. And you said it best. If the guy isn't in the building, if he's not signed, if he's not on your team, then he doesn't even factor into the equation. And if you just add him, that's Lanyap, right? You got a really good inside guy who can go over the middle. You got Mike Thomas out there. Now you got a rookie who doesn't have that pressure, right? If you got a good number 2 cornerback, then maybe the rookie doesn't see that much attention or that guy as much, or he's not seeing the safety as much because, well, you got a guy in the middle that can attack. You got a former All-Pro number 1 wide receiver who's healthy and motivated, and now you can just give your quarterback, more weapons to get a really good and fair evaluation on him. So I do think that's the best.
I think you also want to be at a spot too, like when Mike Thomas's contract expires, that maybe Chris Olave, say if he's the guy that they draft, is now the guy that you're paying. So if you're always paying one guy, just kind of get that pipeline going so that you're developing that guy, he's there, and you aren't looking on the open market to pay somebody else's guy. Sure. Like it's better if that person's coming from in your program, you're building on them, you're mitigating that risk, because you can bring someone in, they might not be able to handle the super long play calls, and now all of a sudden, so you want to know the underbelly when you're investing in these positions, and it's just better to do that in-house with young players to develop them, and then that's
who says Mike doesn't have a Mike Thomas year come back, wants a new contract, saw the Tyreek Hill contract, saw the Devontae Adams contract, and he's like, hey, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but you don't know how these things. I mean, Mike said
yesterday's price is not today's
price is not today's price. There you go, right? So I can't say it any better than that. And so you want a pipeline, and also, and we were talking about it at the members only. The NewOrleans.Football event that we had today. That shout out to the people that showed up to that, because that was fun. But 11 personnel is like base offense in the NFL now, right? When you look at, that's the most run NFL personnel grouping that we have. And so basically your number 3 wide receiver is a starter, right? And so I'm not saying you need an all-pro guy there, but you need a guy that's competent, right? You need production out of that position as you do the number 1 and number 2 position. And if you don't get it from there, then I think you got to have the tight end or the elite running back. Now the Saints thankfully do, have a running back in that position, but I just think, adding to all of the problems that they had at wide receiver, like you got one guy and you really need 3, right? And if the 2 is high end, then the 3 is more manageable. But if you have a rookie at the number 2, then that just gives you a smaller margin for error again. And like you said, it adds, if the rookie can't come in and figure it out, and now the position is just made even more worse. So just getting more weapons and more production out of that position is just key, and it's something I think that they should be looking at doing.
Absolutely.
So another position that we haven't spoken about yet is safety, and that's not a position that we've spoken a little bit about it in the first round, but not a lot, right? And I think that that's one of those sneaky positions that, hey, look, if the offensive tackle, there's a run on offensive tackles, right? Penning's gone, and Cross is gone, and Ike Kwanu is gone, and O'Neal is gone, and they don't feel super high on the next guy on the board, then you still got to make a pick, right? You don't want a quarterback. You don't want to force that pick if you're not in love with the guy. You can go PPA there, or you can look at another position where you feel like there's a need, and that's safety. So what's your thought on them, like potentially taking a guy on the back end in the first round, if even if a tackle is there for a guy that they want isn't there?
I think it's an important position. if the right guys there,
Yeah.
I'm in support of it. I feel like it's in short supply in the first round. I don't know if there's a ton of guys. Hamilton, who's the other one that's first round?
The kid from Hill from Michigan.
Hill, yeah.
Love him.
Yeah. So I think those are kind of really your only options. And then third round, I think it's kind of like Jaquan Brisker and or second round. Yeah.
Seen Cook from Cincinnati.
Yeah. I feel like there's better value in the second, but if you can get the impact player in the first, I like it. I mean, I think it's a position that they, you can't take it for granted. And I like PJ Williams a lot. I'm not taking anything away from him. I like him better is your kind of do-it-all versatile dime package safety and not maybe necessarily your nickel and base package safety. So, yeah, I mean, if it's there, I don't love the positional value necessarily in the first. I feel like you got to kind of be like a Hall of Fame level safety to be, kind of that early first round pick. Hamilton, I think, has some of that. His 40 times a little bit weird. He didn't run it necessarily in a straight line, which is kind of weird too. But look, his tape's amazing, and if he's there, like I like him as a pick. It's 16.
I feel like the NFL is overthinking him a little bit.
Yeah,
it's like
it is
dropping him a little bit.
It is. You kind of turn it on, you watch him play. Like Marcus Williams didn't have a great 40 time either, but he has amazing instincts, and you just never looked at him and were like, man, Marcus Williams is slow, right? Yeah. So if you take good angles, 40 angles aside, but good angles on the field, which we see Kyle Hamilton doing on tape, I like him a lot in the first. He's really like he's the guy that I would feel best about in the first out of all the safeties, and then the rest, I think there's a lot of really good value in the second round. And even if you got to jump up a little in the second, like
if that's your guy,
if that's your guy, that's a decent move. But preferably you get a position with higher positional value in the first.
Yeah. I'm with it. I think that I would be fine with a safety. Like I said, if it's Hamilton or Hill, I think both of those guys are. Hill is interesting because he can actually play the slot too. So I think there's a little crossover there with him and CD. But I mean, he's a good player, and they draft defensive backs really well as of late.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm with you on the positional value. I think, listen, there's not a lot of good offensive linemen coming out of college football. As well, I wouldn't say it like that, but it's a position where guys are doing less and less NFL-like things due to the nature of college offenses. Right. I think that's a better way to put it. And so if you have a guy that's like, those guys tend to go early because of that reason. Right, because there's such a high value on that position. And in safety, there's talk like, oh, safeties don't matter. Some people that still think they don't have the position of value.
I disagree with that.
It's not as high as cornerback or quarterback, et cetera, wide receiver. But it's not a high value position until you don't have a safety to run the defense you want to run, right? And so, the fact that they draft so well at cornerback, you got a Debo recently, you got Marshawn, you got blank. Yeah, Marcus Williams, you draft. So you feel like you draft a CD back there too, right? Von Bell. So you feel like the guys that they have in house.
Can we call CD a cornerback at this point? Like, it's just
that's true.
I mean, he's a cornerback.
He's a cornerback. He's a slot cornerback. Yeah, that's what he is. And I think that's when he tries to get paid, he's going to try to get paid.
And he should. Yes.
Yeah, even though slot cornerbacks, you got to think about the salary there. That's interesting. He's not an outside guy, but I think he's. But the point being, they draft cornerbacks and safeties and DBs really well, right? Just recently. And so if they took a guy in the first at that position, I would feel okay about it because I know that, just traditionally and historically, they do well by drafting guys at those positions. And, at the end of the day, you want a good player there, right? And I feel like if that's what they leave with, at the post-draft, I may be like, I wish he was an offensive tackle. I wish he was a wide receiver. But if the player comes out to be good in a year, I don't think that's something that we're having a conversation about where he got drafted.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see. Like, so out of those positions, wide receiver, offensive tackle, cornerback, and let's just throw quarterback in there. So the only position that you feel like they must draft, like it's not a need, this is a must, you have to have it has to be wide receiver.
I'll throw running back in there too. I think running back's a must position at this point because if Alvin misses time, I think we've kind of seen that Tony Jones Jr., he's maybe not necessarily the guy you want in there if just 1-2, him and Mark are the only people available early in the season. Yeah. Mark's getting older. I think you need to get, again, somebody in the pipeline, get a younger player, someone that can develop, add a little bit of punch to that position going forward. And early in the season, it's going to be a spot where someone needs to play a lot, and they haven't done anything to address that position. They haven't done anything to address anything on offense. So that's a must position. I would put wide receiver is a must. Tiering on wide receivers up here, running backs here, and then I'd put OT right underneath it.
So you put a running back above OT?
Yeah, I think so, because there's a hole that you got to fill. Like it's we don't know what the suspension is going to be, if it comes at all. I think it probably very likely will come.
Yeah.
Although last year we thought Marshawn was going to miss time and he didn't. So I guess you never know. But yeah, that's a position where I don't know that you can run a viable team without getting another player at that position. So until they do something in free agency, I think it has to come in the draft. So third, fourth round, I feel like that's an absolute must position.
Yeah. And the good news about that is that's a position where you don't feel like you have to address that in the first 2 rounds. Right. Now, if you do, listen, again, positional value running back. First round, I definitely would probably have a little bit to say about if they drafted a running back in the first round.
So. Yeah.
Second round, depending on the guy, if it's like a guy that really, he's really good, he fits what they do, he's going to make the team better. And again, like we said earlier, the running game is something that's important this year.
Yeah.
Right. I think Jameis will benefit much more, if he can drop back, run some play action. I mean, we think about some of the deep shots that he took this year. You can think back to the preseason up through the season, like a lot of those shots were off play action, right? I mean, just they're running the same play over and over. It looks the same. Well, this time he tucks the ball, he keeps the ball instead of giving it to the running back, and Deontay Hardy's streaking down the field wide open, right? And so, I do think that, that's a different train of thought to get it. But running back, you can get him in later rounds. Ideally, you don't wait too late. I think that once you get into the third, I think that's a good time to start looking at a running back. Third and fourth round this year, you can get some pretty good running backs, and I think that's something that they should be looking at doing.
Yeah, and if they do it early, like if you end up drafting the next Alvin level player, it's fine. Like even if they did that in the first round and you got Alvin, like that starts out with like, oh, that's crazy. They're like, oh, that's crazy. They got him. So I mean, it's just a matter of production. But looking at it, first round seems way too early. Second, ideally, I still like the first 3 picks to be wide receiver, OT, safety, and then running back after that. But if the running back's better in the third round, take them. Yeah, take them. Second round, take them. Like whatever. So it's fine, but it's something that I do feel like absolutely 100% without question is something I got to address. And man, the way they've just approached offense has been
interesting.
Yeah, it's been
interesting. It's been interesting. Yeah, it's been interesting.
So they'll draft a defensive tackle and
man, don't do me like that. Offensive guard in the first round. I wouldn't put it past them. Yeah, I'm never surprised by offensive line. So if they draft a running back, like, do you think there should be a particular profile for the running back? Is it an Alvin type guy, or you're getting Alvin back, like maybe more of a grinder? Do you have a preference on the type of guy that that you think that you look at for the running back position? Because you can get a guy, even if he's not a big running back, if he only has to do it for 6 games, maybe you're okay with that, right? But if it's like longer, then maybe you don't want the guy taking that much of a beating. So what's your preference on the type of running back that they take?
I think ideally somebody between the tackles, even though you kind of got that with Mark, but just even post Mark to have that. I thought one of the big issues last year was how much Alvin ran between the tackles early in the season. I thought he was taking way too many hits. I thought he was seeing way too many heavy boxes. That isn't the role that you want to see him in. And I understand, like, maybe with Jameis, that has to be a little bit more, especially if you're going to be a play action team, to maybe just show it and set it up a little bit. But I don't think you want to go into a season expecting him to be your grinder, to be the guy that gets the hard yards. When he's taking a hit, like, I would rather see him outside the tackle taking a hit from, a will linebacker, or a slot corner. Or an outside corner or safety. Like, I don't want the middle linebacker barreling down on him and being like a heat-seeking missile. That guy has way too much value to this team. Everything's kind of dependent on him. And I think on it, like, we're going to do our player rankings or whatever. Like, he's easily going to be the number 1 player on offense now. Like, there's nobody else even in that realm. It's him, then Ramczyk, and then probably Mike.
McCoy. Mike McCoy.
But at this point, and Mike comes back healthy, he's right back in that mix. But coming into the season, I think you're looking at Alvin as like the most important player on the team. Granted, he's going to miss some games to start, but you got to do things to protect him. And if he does have a little vacation to start the season,
he's going to be healthier at the tail end, right?
So don't wear him out. Just make sure he's there at the end of the season.
Yeah, I think the usage of Kamara is going to be interesting this year because that's a position where you take a lot of beating, right? And the good thing about Kamara is that in college he didn't take a lot of like pounding from having to run the ball a lot, right? He didn't have to didn't have to hold down the feature back role when he was in college at Tennessee. Then he got to the NFL. Mark Ingram's there, right? So that's the guy that's taking all the beating for him. And then you have Latavius Murray, who did the same thing. And so you're getting a more productive version of him in that mode, right? And so I do agree with you. Like the usage of him last year, I don't think it was ideal. I understand why they did it, right?
They had to, yeah.
They didn't have no choice, right? But I think that if you have a healthy Kamara, Mike, and a good number 2, even if you don't have the number 3 guy, and Alvin kind of can supplant that role in a lot of ways, right? Because you can have him in the back, you can move him out the slot, he can line up wide. He's basically another receiver in a lot of ways, right? But I think it depends on his usage, and I think it depends on, how he's being deployed, right? And so getting him some help back there in the backfield, having somebody back there to, get those tough yards, run between the tackles, etc. I just think it's going to be key to, just the team being able to get the most out of him as a player. And I think it's something that has, I know the Taysom thing came up. We was talking about Taysom today, and they was like, how should he be used? And I'm like, well, should he be used as quarterback or not? And I'm like, well, 3rd and 1, put him in the game, right? Put him in the game, keep Kamara out of there, or, let someone else take that beating, right? And so the more they can do to, stretch that out and keep him being a healthy player and keep him in that best role, keep him as a receiver, I just think that's going to end up serving the team best. So,
yeah, I agree. Look, one of the things they haven't done though is like we keep waiting to see them use Alvin more, like in these ways, and like kind of in the rookie season we saw a lot of diversity, and then over the last couple of years, like it's kind of been a little bit more static. We've seen him out of the slot less than I've expected. I thought we were going to see more of that last year. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see kind of what Pete Carmichael's vision is. Like Sean's vision for him kind of changed and dialed back and became a little more traditional.
How do you think that happened?
Some of it's necessity, I think.
Injuries,
maybe. Some of it too. Yeah, his injuries. He got banged up. I think he became, a couple of years there. He was a little bit limited in what he did last year. I think it was just due to not having that other running back. So that was part of it. And then, I just think that just certain things didn't necessarily line up the way they thought they were. Ty Montgomery didn't necessarily fit into the running back profile the way they initially thought he was gonna. Right. So I think, just getting some different guys in there maybe opens that up. Create some more possibilities, and maybe we see some of that, but I don't know that they necessarily still
see Alvin in that way. Because it felt like it was a little philosophical in some ways, right? Because Sean leaned heavily on the run game earlier in the season, right? Almost to the point where, he was trying to kind of protect Jameis from Jameis, I felt like at sometimes, right? Where he was really, there was a lack of aggression on offense. And listen, you got a good defense. And you feel like you got guys who can, keep the score low. And so, it definitely felt like there was something philosophical there. So last topic. I think we have addressed the fact that the Saints have these needs, right? I think when you go into, we say, hey, man, get a running back, get an offensive tackle, get a wide receiver, right? Like, or in the safety, right? And some form, some way, shape, or form, some of them through the draft. I think we can say if you get a safety in free agency, if you sign Tyrann Mathieu and you don't get one in the draft, I think you're fine. Right. Don't do that for Jarvis Landry, but I would understand that as safety. Is there a certain point in this draft where you feel like they should abandon maybe going for need and they just say let's go for the best player that we have available here?
I mean, you'd like to see it with every pick, honestly. Get the wide receiver and then just really BPA the rest of the way. That just, like I've said before, I don't really think there are many teams that truly 100% BPA their drafts. I think Packers are kind of like one of those teams. I don't think there's a lot of teams though where you would go through it and say, hey, these were the best players and this were these teams' needs, and none of them lined up. I just don't think that's really how it works. But I think the Saints they're like in a weird place where they have some needs, some musts, but they kind of are free after a certain point to kind of go BPA the whole draft after you get the wide receiver and maybe a safety.
Tackle maybe depends on. But even tackle, if they don't walk out of this draft for the tackle, I wouldn't consider it an unsuccessful draft.
If they had signed Jarvis and Honey Badger, they would kind of be set up to just kind of go through the draft and play it however they want. And there would be, they should do this. They should get the young receiver. They should do that.
Yeah.
But really, they could do anything, and you could kind of stack players in different spots. And they'd be a much better team with
Man,
both
it'd be
those
so much
guys. Like
better.
it kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird to me that they were like both in the building, nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
If there is interest in Honey Badger, signing him after the draft keeps him out of the comp pick formula. So that would make sense. Jarvis got cut, so you could sign him now and put him on your team. But maybe you just want to see what you draft and how they fit, and maybe those guys want that information as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know necessarily that anything's dead. I would probably expect them to make a signing of some sort after the draft of some type of player. But yeah, I mean, they aren't. Nobody's really just going to BPA it though. Like it's going to be every pick's going to kind of stack up, and then at a certain point, you probably do. It's just you get good players and then hope they develop. But I think those early picks are all going to kind of mesh with some type of need.
With some type of need. Yeah, I tend to agree. I think.
But here's the thing though, like everything's either a need or about to be a need, and you can look at everything and see a scenario where there's only a handful of spots where teams like truly set, like linebacker. Oh, they don't need a linebacker. Well, Demario Davis is getting older, even though I don't see any fall off. At some point, it's going to come. It's not a need now, but it might be in a year or two. So if you draft someone now, they're in the pipeline. So
Pete Werner last year, I mean, people hated the pick. I wasn't the fan of him at the time, but I didn't hate the pick. I just
some was like
right. It was just but it was like oh, we don't need a linebacker, and then it turns out a year later, he's your starting linebacker.
Yeah.
Right. So draft for the future. Right, and you set yourself up better for long-term success instead. So
I'd bring Quan back too, but I'd just flip that order.
Yeah.
I think Werner's earned the snaps, and I would try to find a way to get Quan on the field. But
he's like a luxury, maybe a little bit more at this point.
Yeah,
considering your other needs in your team,
right? Werner should be the lead guy, and if you find a way to get Quan on the field and utilize him, have his leadership and all that stuff on the team. But I think at this point it should be Pete Werner's show. You drafted him in the second round. You can't have a third-round linebacker and a second-round linebacker and just keep signing this guy on one-year deals that, nobody's beating down the door right now at this point to get him. So, but again, he's going to be somebody that's probably a post-draft signing for a team. And if he was coming back, I don't know, maybe it would have already happened, but we'll see.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what this team does. I mean, we'll keep covering it here. They gotta nail these draft picks. They have to address these needs. I think they do, regardless of what happens in the draft. I think they have to do some post-draft work and get some of these guys. One of the two of the guys, or both of them, from LSU. Kind of in the building, just to kind of take some of the pressure off what may be expected of some of these rookies that they draft early. So that's it, man.
That's it.
First podcast. Well, not our first live podcast. So if all good. We got the Better Call for those little battle, little things here. But yeah, man, you guys, NewOrleans.Football. If you're watching this, please support us. You go to NewOrleans.Football/subscribe. Code draft season still working.
Draft season still working. Shout out to Eddie on the switcher.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you guys for supporting us. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.